Good afternoon, everyone. Vanakkam. I want to first begin by acknowledging that we're gathered here on the traditional lands of the Algonquin people. And I want to introduce myself. I'm Gary Anandasangri, Member of Parliament for Scarborough Rouge Park. I would like to welcome retired Professor Emeritus from Sweden, Professor Nadaraja Sriskandarajah, who is an elder in the Tamil community and someone who's highly respected around the world. I also want to welcome here, we have Abarna Salvaraja, who is representing People for Equality and Relief in Lanka, as well as Vinod Navajivanada, Quebec Tamil Community Center, as well as the Honorable Mark Holland, who is the Member of Parliament for Ajax, and he will be sharing his perspectives as well. I do want to just say this is a very historical day for the Tamil community, not just in Canada, but around the world. As you know, the end of the armed conflict in 2009 resulted in mass atrocities being committed by the Sri Lankan government. Today is a very somber day, a day that we reflect and deeply pay respects to all those who perished, all those survivors who continue to live with a great deal of determination and persistence to obtain justice for their loss. In Canada, as one of the largest Tamil diasporas in the world, we are in solidarity with the Tamil population of the north and east of Sri Lanka to ensure that they have peace, stability, accountability, justice, and self-determination. So this motion today, a unanimous consent motion brought forward to the House, acknowledges the genocide of the Tamil people and recognizes May 18th of each year as Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. It is the first recognition of its kind anywhere in the world, but it doesn't stop there. In fact, the journey towards accountability is very long, and one that we need to double down on a day like this to ensure that those who perpetrated these crimes are held to account. And that includes the two brothers who are ruling Sri Lanka right now, the Rajapakshas. So we have some speakers who will be commenting on today's developments, but I do want to invite Mark Holland, the Honorable Mark Holland, to say a few words. And we will follow that by Abarna Salvaraja from Pearl.
Thank you, Gary, and I want to thank MP Anandasangri for his leadership on this issue. In 2009, I was a member of Parliament, and my office was filled with so many Tamils who had loved ones in Sri Lanka who were facing horrors that are impossible to hear. And to stand here today, 13 years later, and to have Parliament acknowledge the genocide that took place, the horrors that were visited on those families, to acknowledge the exceptional pain that those families had to feel as their loved ones were indiscriminately shelled and killed is so important. And on this solemn occasion to do this, to be able to recognize May 18th every single year, but to do this, Gary, with your leadership in the House of Commons today, to pass a unanimous consent motion that Parliament can say around the world that we see the horrors that happen there, that we demand that there be an accounting for those horrors, and that we make sure that truth, reconciliation, and justice are the calls that we have now and going forward. So it's an honor for me to be here today, and I really want to say, Gary, thank you for your leadership on this. It was a very important and special day today in Parliament.
Thank you kindly. This is a historic day for the Tamil community in Canada and the Tamil nation worldwide. Thank you for inviting People for Equality and Relief in Lanka, otherwise known as PEARL, a human rights organization committed to justice, accountability, and self-determination for the Tamil people, to speak today on this historic recognition of the Tamil genocide, 13 years after it took place on the shores of Nandikada Lagoon. On this day, in 2009, tens of thousands of Tamils were killed in Mullawaikal. An estimated range of 70,000 to 169,796 Tamils remain unaccounted for, most of whom were intentionally shelled, attacked, or killed by the government of Sri Lanka, which to this day enjoys complete impunity for its mass atrocities. In fact, the very perpetrators of the genocide remain the leaders of the country, including Sri Lanka's President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Today, tens of thousands of Tamils gathered at Mullawaikal in the Tamil homeland to commemorate this day, despite heavy militarization, police presence, and over 10 checkpoints in the area, based on Pearl's reporting. Tamil families of the disappeared continue to be harassed, surveilled, and treated as security threats by the Sri Lankan security forces, and yet they remain steadfast in their demands to know what happened to their missing and disappeared loved ones. For decades, Tamil victim survivor communities and families of the disappeared have stood at the forefront of demands for an international mechanism to ensure truth, justice, and accountability for atrocities committed during the armed conflict. Today, the recognition of Tamil genocide is an important and welcome step, and we hope this motion catalyzes further political and legal and political actions and consequences for the perpetrators pursuant to Canada's obligations that this crime of all crimes must never go unpunished. Genocide recognition is significant in the Tamil community's struggle for justice and accountability for past and ongoing violations. It holds tremendous value for victim survivors to name the crime of genocide as they identify it. I'd also like to note that genocide recognition is significant for Tamil Canadian communities from coast to coast. Pearl's Executive Director, Archana Ravichandradeva, will today lay flowers at Esquimalt Harbour in honor of the 76 Tamil refugees who arrived on the shores of British Columbia on the MV Ocean Lady in 2009 and the 492 Tamil refugees who arrived later on MV Sunsea in 2010, fleeing Sri Lanka's genocide. We take this time to thank the Indigenous communities who welcomed the refugees to their lands that day and for all the support they provided the newcomers. We also honor the 155 Tamil refugees who were found by Captain Gus Dalton off the coast of Newfoundland in 1986, where they too had to flee Sri Lanka's pogroms and genocidal violence of Black July. Tamil Canadian stories of displacement and resilience against genocide are tied to the oceans and lands in which we now live. And this recognition of genocide brings some measure of healing for Tamil Canadians, as well as the global Tamil nation. We thank Member of Parliament Gary Anandasangri for his efforts in the passing of this motion, as well as all those who have worked from across the political spectrum to make today's recognition a reality. This is one step of many, and only strengthens our resolve in seeing justice and accountability for Sri Lanka's genocide against Tamils. Thank you.
Anavarikkum Vanakkam. Good afternoon to all. My name is Vinoth Navajivanantha, President of the Quebec Tamil Community Centre. Today has been 13 years in the making. On behalf of the Quebec Tamil Community Centre, we would like to thank all federal parties that have supported this motion. On voulait remercier les partis fédéral, libéral, Parti conservatoire, Nouveau Parti démocratique. On voulait aussi remercier le Parti Bloc québécois pour leur solidarité. We would like to also thank all the volunteers and Quebec Tamil leaders that have been working tirelessly behind the scenes to support this motion. Today's motion is proof that truth and justice will always prevail, that the deaths of thousands of countless innocent Tamils were not in vain, will not be silenced, will not be forgotten. History should remember the atrocities that the Tamil people have faced. History books should include the stories of the countless Tamils that struggle, continue to struggle, and today Today's motion ensures that this will ring true. I'd like to personally thank MP Gary Anand for putting forth this motion. And with the remaining time that I have, if I may, I'd like to request a moment of silence for the thousands of lives that have perished in Sri Lanka. Merci.
Thank you, Vinata Barna and MP Holland. Before we open it up for questions, there are many people that whose work needs to be acknowledged, and I know it's always dangerous to, on a day like this, to acknowledge some and not all. So I do particularly want to acknowledge the incredible support of MP Mark Holland and the Honorable Navdeep Bains, who for many, many years has been a stalwart supporter of the community, and of course the many staff across the different departments who worked on this, including Vandana Qatar from the Prime Minister's office. I also want to thank the countless number of people who helped us bridge the conversations between our party as well as the other political parties, including the Conservative Party, the Bloc Québécois, and the New Democratic Party. Without a collective effort, we would not be here today. And today is not a day for politics, it's a day to ensure that human rights prevails, truth prevails, and justice, which will ultimately prevail. Thank you. With that, I'll open it up for questions. My French is quite limited, but Vinod, I think, can answer some of those questions. So we're open to questions now.
So if you have any questions, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen to ask your questions. Si vous avez une question, utilisez la fonction main levée au bas de l'écran pour poser votre question. La première question sera Lakantas Patmanathan. Go ahead, la parole est à vous.
Hi, MP Anand Shankari. Thanks for taking this question. How important is it for the Tamil community of Canada today is, and also going forward, what more can be done in order for Tamils to have some sort of a lasting resolution or lasting peace in Sri Lanka as a community working from outside of Sri Lanka? Thanks for taking my question.
Thank you, Lankadas. I mean, this is obviously it requires a comprehensive response, but let me be very brief. This recognition is quite important. This is a consensus amongst the parties who, through a unanimous consent motion in Parliament, have basically acknowledged the Tamil genocide in Sri Lanka. And recognize May 18th as Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. So from that perspective, I think it's very important. It of course builds from Bill 104 that was passed in the province of Ontario last year, and several municipalities that have declared May 18th as Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. So I think it is very important. It's in fact an affirmation that the country that many Tamils have now called home, our country, recognizes their pain and anguish. And I think it's a very important step. Of course, the road towards accountability is very long. Through the Human Rights Council for the last 13 years, Canada has played a leading role. We continue to be part of the core group on Sri Lanka. From Minister Jolie's perspective, she is very keen to ensure that accountability advances on the island. So as we look to the September session of the UN Human Rights Council, as well as looking at the current economic climate in Sri Lanka and the political crisis that it has brought forward, I think there are some important measures that Canada should be taking, and we look forward in the weeks and months to come to be able to share some of those measures with Canadians. But I think it's safe to say that as a country, we are very committed to ensuring accountability and the rules-based international order prevails. And I can speak, I know, from my colleague or many of my colleagues here, that as long as we have a voice in this House, and as long as we have a voice in this country, we will continue to be in solidarity with the community.
Do you have a follow-up?
I do, yes.
Go ahead.
As far as I'm aware, Canada is the first country in the world to recognize today as the Tamil Genocide Day. How important is it for an MP coming from Sri Lanka of Tamil heritage, nationality, in order to be in a position to be able to do such a thing today, also do it with the approval of the whole Parliament. Do it on May 18th. Give us your personal feeling as to how important is it for Gary Ann and the Shankari MP to be able to do this on May 18th.
I think it's important for the community. It's a deeply emotional day. I am so deeply honored to have Professor Sri Skandaraja here, who I look up to as someone of an elder in our community. To have witnessed this, I've a number of young people that are here whose work I'm inspired by, including the work of Pearl, and I know that this was a collective effort. This is not one individual MP standing here bringing forward a motion. I may have been the vehicle to do that, but this is a result of enormous struggles of so many members of our community across party lines, across the spectrum of political views, across the country, across the world. But like I do want to say that one of the people that I really wished was here was Mrs. Kandasamy. She was someone who was an eyewitness to the genocide. She was embedded with the Tamil medical team in the last months of the conflict, and she was here in 2019, the last time we actually commemorated May 18th in person in Ottawa and on the Hill. And I wish she was here to see that, but that is also a reality for us because a lot of the witnesses are aging, and if you look at those mothers of the disappeared, I think there's a half a dozen or so. They've been protesting for the last 3 years. It is so so tragic that they are not able to have their last breath without knowing what happened to their loved ones, or they're going to their graves in pain and agony and without closure. So this responsibility, like that I have, and I think every Tamil Canadian has, I think it's deeply important that we are able to do whatever we can in our own, in our own ways. When I asked for a brief, I had a brief immediately, within hours from Pearl. When I wanted to have someone reach out to Party X or Party Y, people, didn't matter what time it was, they responded. So we this is a very important collective effort. I'm honored to have humbled to have played a very small part in it, but it is also my responsibility that I'm discharging today with this.
And this concludes the press conference. C'est ma fin la conférence de presse. Merci.